I bought the Harper Estate and found bones inside the brick walls. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, interrupting Marcus Thompson's routine breakfast in his cramped Chicago apartment. The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer named Harrison Mills, speaking with the measured tone of someone delivering news that would change everything. Marcus had inherited a substantial sum from a great-aunt he'd never met, Eleanor Whitmore, along with a property that had been in trust for over 60 years, the Harper Estate, as it was known in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, had been Eleanor's final bequest to the only surviving member of her family line. The inheritance came with conditions. Marcus had to take personal ownership of the property, live there for at least 1 year, and complete restoration work that would return the mansion to its original 1890s grandeur. If he failed to meet these conditions, the entire inheritance would revert to the state. Marcus had been struggling as a freelance architect in Chicago, barely making ends meet in a profession that had been devastated by economic uncertainty. The inheritance, nearly $3 million plus the estate, represented a chance at the life he'd always dreamed of. He could restore the historic mansion, establish himself as a specialist in historical preservation, and finally escape the cycle of financial stress that had dominated his 20s. The train journey to Millbrook took him through autumn landscapes that seemed painted in shades of gold and crimson. As the urban sprawl of Connecticut cities gave way to rolling hills and colonial-era farmhouses, Marcus felt a sense of anticipation that he hadn't experienced in years. The lawyer had provided him with historical photographs of the Harper Estate in its prime, a magnificent Victorian mansion with elaborate gingerbread trim, towering spires, and wraparound porches that commanded a view over the Connecticut River Valley. The reality that greeted him in Millbrook was somewhat different. The Harper Estate sat on a hill overlooking the town, its dark silhouette visible from miles away. What had once been elegant architectural details now appeared ominous and foreboding. The mansion's Gothic Revival style, which had been fashionable in the 1890s, now seemed almost predatory against the October sky. Bare trees surrounded the property like skeletal fingers, and the wrought iron fence that encircled the estate had been overtaken by thorny vines that seemed to have grown with unusual aggression. Marcus's first impression, upon entering the mansion, was one of overwhelming neglect. The interior had been abandoned for decades, with dust sheets covering furniture and layers of grime obscuring the original grandeur. But beneath the neglect, he could see the bones of something magnificent. Hand-carved moldings ran along the walls, intricate parquet floors lay hidden beneath decades of accumulated debris, and massive fireplaces dominated rooms that had once hosted elaborate social gatherings. The mansion contained 23 rooms spread across 4 floors, including a basement that stretched beneath the entire structure. The main floor featured a grand entrance hall with a sweeping staircase, formal dining and living rooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a kitchen that retained its original Victorian-era fixtures. The second and third floors contained numerous bedrooms and sitting rooms, while the 4th floor had apparently been used as servants' quarters. Marcus spent his first week developing a restoration plan and familiarizing himself with the mansion's layout. He discovered that the Harper family had been prominent in Connecticut society from the 1850s to the 1920s, made wealthy through textile manufacturing and real estate investments. The family had built the mansion in 1892 as a testament to their success, sparing no expense on imported materials and the finest craftsmanship available. But the Harper family's prosperity had ended abruptly in 1929. According to local historical records, the family patriarch, Cornelius Harper, had lost his fortune in the stock market crash and had supposedly committed suicide shortly thereafter. His wife and children had abandoned the mansion, leaving it empty except for a caretaker who had maintained the property until the 1960s. The mansion had then passed through various hands before eventually ending up in Eleanor Whitmore's trust. Marcus began the restoration work by focusing on the mansion's structural integrity. The roof needed extensive repairs. The plumbing and electrical systems required complete replacement, and many of the windows had been damaged by decades of weather exposure. He hired local contractors for the major work while handling the historical preservation aspects himself. It was during the third week of renovation that Marcus made his first disturbing discovery. While removing damaged plaster from a wall in the library, he noticed that the brickwork beneath seemed inconsistent. Some bricks appeared newer than others, and the mortar showed signs of having been disturbed and replaced multiple times over the years. When he mentioned this to Tom Bradley, the contractor handling the masonry work, the older man had given him a strange look and suggested they simply cover the wall with new plaster rather than investigating further. Marcus's curiosity was stronger than his caution. That evening, after the workers had gone home, he returned to the library with a hammer and chisel. The inconsistent brickwork had been bothering him all day, and his architectural training had taught him to investigate any structural anomalies. What he found behind the newer bricks made him drop his tools and step backward in shock. Wedged into a cavity in the wall was a human skull, its empty sockets staring out at him with an accusation that seemed to transcend death. The skull was accompanied by other bones, ribs, vertebrae, and what appeared to be the remains of a human hand. The bones were old, yellowed with age, but they had been deliberately placed in the wall cavity and sealed behind a layer of bricks that matched the mansion's original construction. Marcus's hands trembled as he used his phone's flashlight to examine the gruesome discovery more closely. The bones appeared to belong to an adult, though determining gender or age would require forensic expertise he didn't possess. More disturbing was the realization that the cavity had been specifically constructed to house the remains. This wasn't a case of someone being accidentally sealed in a wall, but rather a deliberate entombment. The discovery transformed Marcus's perception of the mansion entirely. What had seemed like a magnificent restoration project now felt like a tomb filled with secrets that someone had gone to great lengths to hide. He spent a sleepless night considering his options, torn between his obligation to report the discovery to authorities and his fear that doing so would result in the mansion being declared a crime scene, effectively ending his restoration project and his chance at financial security. The next morning brought another shock. While examining other walls in the mansion for similar inconsistencies, Marcus discovered that the irregular brickwork pattern was not unique to the library. The dining room showed evidence of wall modifications, as did two of the bedrooms on the second floor and a sitting room on the third floor. Each location showed the same telltale signs: newer bricks mixed with older ones, mortar that had been disturbed and replaced, and subtle differences in wall thickness that suggested hidden cavities. Marcus realized with growing horror that he had not stumbled upon a single murder victim, but rather evidence of multiple deaths that had been concealed within the very structure of the mansion. The Harper Estate was not just his inheritance, it was an elaborate mausoleum containing the remains of people who had disappeared over the course of decades. That afternoon, driven by a compulsion he couldn't resist, Marcus began the grim work of opening the other suspicious wall sections. In the dining room, he found the remains of what appeared to be a young woman, her bones accompanied by scraps of fabric that suggested she had been wearing a dress from the early 1900s. The bedroom yielded the skeleton of a child, small and fragile, that had been carefully arranged as if the person had been laid to rest with some semblance of dignity. Each discovery raised more questions than it answered. Who were these people? Why had they been killed and entombed in the mansion's walls? And most importantly, who had been responsible for their deaths? The careful placement of the bodies and the skilled masonry work required to seal them suggested that these were not crimes of passion, but rather calculated murders carried out by someone with both the resources and the expertise to hide the evidence permanently. As Marcus documented his discoveries with photographs and careful measurements, he began to notice other anomalies throughout the mansion. Certain rooms had an oppressive atmosphere that made him uncomfortable, even during daylight hours. Temperature variations seemed to occur without any explanation from the mansion's heating or ventilation systems. And on several occasions he had heard sounds, footsteps, whispers, and what sounded like crying that had no apparent source. The manifestations intensified as Marcus uncovered more remains. By the end of his first month at the mansion, he had discovered 7 bodies hidden within the walls, each one representing a life that had been violently ended and deliberately concealed. The victims appeared to span several decades, based on the clothing remnants and the varying states of the skeletal remains. Some bones showed evidence of trauma, fractured skulls, broken ribs, that suggested violent deaths. Marcus's rational mind told him to contact the police immediately, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the terms of his inheritance, which required him to complete the restoration work. Or perhaps it was a growing obsession with uncovering the truth about the Harper family's dark secrets. Whatever the reason, he found himself drawn deeper into the mansion's mystery, even as the paranormal activity around him intensified. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered a hidden room behind a bookshelf in the library. The secret chamber contained documents that began to explain the horrific truth about the Harper estate, and revealed that his investigation had attracted the attention of forces that had been guarding the mansion's secrets for over a century. The hidden room behind the library bookshelf was smaller than a walk-in closet, but it contained enough documentation to reconstruct nearly a century of murder and concealment. Marcus had discovered the entrance accidentally while examining the wall where he'd found the first skeleton. A loose section of shelving had shifted under pressure, revealing a narrow doorway that had been concealed behind false book spines. Inside the secret chamber, Marcus found a collection of journals, photographs, and correspondence that painted a horrifying picture of the Harper family's true nature. The documents were meticulously organized in chronological order, spanning from 1895 to 1967, and they detailed a family tradition of murder that had been passed down through generations. The earliest entries, written in Cornelius Harper's distinctive handwriting, described what he called the family obligation, a systematic elimination of individuals who posed threats to the Harper fortune and reputation. The victims included business rivals, blackmailers, servants who had witnessed family secrets, and even relatives who had become inconvenient. Each murder was carefully planned and executed, with the bodies hidden within the mansion's walls to ensure they would never be discovered. Cornelius Harper had not been a man driven by passion or mental illness, but rather a calculating predator who viewed murder as a business tool. His journal entries described the killings with the same detached tone he used for recording financial transactions. He had developed specific techniques for disposing of bodies, including the construction of hidden chambers within the mansions, walls that could be sealed and disguised so effectively that they became invisible to casual observation. The tradition had continued with Cornelius's son, Theodore Harper, who had inherited both the family business and its deadly practices. Theodore's contributions to the family legacy were documented in journal entries from the 1920s and 1930s, describing how he had refined his father's methods and expanded the scope of the family's murderous activities. Under Theodore's leadership, the Harper family had eliminated dozens of victims, including several prominent figures whose disappearances had made national news. The documents revealed that the Harper family's downfall in 1929 had not been due to financial losses in the stock market crash, but rather to Theodore's increasing carelessness and the growing suspicions of local law enforcement. Several investigations had begun focusing on the Harper family's possible involvement in missing persons cases, and Theodore had realized that discovery was inevitable. Rather than face exposure and prosecution, he had staged his own death and disappeared, leaving behind the mansion and its terrible secrets. But the most shocking revelation came in the final set of documents, dated from the 1950s and 1960s. These papers were signed by Eleanor Whitmore, Marcus's great-aunt and the woman who had left him the inheritance. Eleanor had not been an innocent inheritor of the Harper property, but rather a willing participant in maintaining the family's deadly traditions. Her journals described how she had continued the pattern of murder and concealment, adding new victims to the collection hidden within the mansion's walls. Eleanor's entries revealed the true scope of the Harper legacy. Over the course of 70 years, 3 generations of the family had murdered and entombed over 30 people within the mansion. The victims ranged from business associates and household staff to random individuals who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Eleanor's final entries, dated just months before her death, indicated that she had chosen Marcus as her heir specifically because she believed he possessed the qualities necessary to continue the family tradition. The inheritance had not been a generous gift from a distant relative, but rather a carefully planned recruitment into a dynasty of murder. Eleanor had structured the terms of the will to ensure that Marcus would discover the bodies and, she hoped, embrace the family's deadly practices. Her final journal entry expressed confidence that Marcus would understand the necessity of the murders and would add his own victims to the collection. Marcus's horror at these revelations was compounded by the realization that his presence in the mansion had awakened something that had been dormant since Eleanor's death. The paranormal activity that had intensified as he uncovered the bodies was not random supernatural phenomena, but rather the manifestation of the victims' trapped spirits. The carefully sealed chambers that had hidden their physical remains had also imprisoned their souls, creating a supernatural prison within the mansion's walls. The ghostly manifestations became more aggressive as Marcus learned the truth about his inheritance. Temperatures dropped suddenly and dramatically, creating patches of frost on the windows even during mild autumn weather. Doors slammed shut with enough force to crack their frames, and the mansion's lights flickered in patterns that seemed to spell out warnings. On several occasions, Marcus saw spectral figures moving through the hallways, translucent forms that appeared to be reaching out to him in desperate pleas for help. The spirits were not malevolent, Marcus realized, but rather desperate to be freed from their decades-long imprisonment. Each ghost represented one of the Harper family's victims, trapped between life and death by the very walls that concealed their remains. They had been waiting for someone to discover their bodies and provide them with the proper burial that would allow their souls to find peace. Marcus faced a terrible choice. He could contact the authorities, report the murders, and ensure that the victims received proper burial and their families received closure. But doing so would mean forfeiting his inheritance, destroying his financial future, and potentially facing legal consequences for his delay in reporting the crimes. Alternatively, he could maintain the secret, complete the restoration as Eleanor had intended, and potentially continue the family's murderous traditions. The decision was made for him when Marcus discovered that he was not alone in the mansion. Eleanor Whitmore's spirit had also remained bound to the property, and unlike the victims, her ghost was actively malevolent. She appeared to Marcus on a foggy November evening. Her spectral form materialized in the library where he had made his first discovery. Her message was clear: he would continue the family tradition, or he would become its next victim. Eleanor's ghost was more powerful than the other spirits, sustained by decades of evil and a will that had not been broken by death. She could manipulate the physical world in ways that the victim's spirits could not, moving objects, creating dangerous situations, and even influencing Marcus's thoughts and emotions. She began a campaign of psychological torment designed to break his resistance and convince him to embrace his role as the Harper family's heir. The supernatural attacks escalated over several weeks. Marcus found himself trapped in rooms when doors locked themselves from the inside. Tools disappeared and reappeared in dangerous configurations that could have resulted in serious injury. The mansion's electrical system began behaving erratically, creating fire hazards and leaving Marcus in darkness during crucial moments. Most disturbing of all, Eleanor's influence began affecting his dreams, filling his sleep with vivid fantasies of committing murder, and adding new victims to the mansion's collection. Marcus realized that his only hope for escape lay in freeing the victim's spirits and breaking the supernatural hold that Eleanor maintained over the property. Working with paranormal investigators he had contacted secretly, he developed a plan to provide proper burial for all of the Harper family's victims. The process required careful excavation of the remains, identification of the victims when possible, and consecrated burial in the town cemetery. The work was dangerous, as Eleanor's spirit fought viciously against any attempt to disturb the carefully maintained secret. She manifested with increasing frequency and violence, throwing tools, creating supernatural cold that threatened hypothermia, and even attempting to possess Marcus directly. But with each body that was properly removed and buried, her power diminished, and the victims' spirits found peace. The final confrontation came when Marcus discovered Eleanor's own remains, hidden in a chamber beneath the mansion's basement. Unlike her victims, Eleanor had prepared for death by creating a ritual that would bind her spirit to the property permanently. Her body had been surrounded by occult symbols and artifacts designed to maintain her supernatural presence indefinitely. Destruction of Eleanor's ritual components and the proper burial of her remains finally broke the curse that had held the mansion for over a century. The surviving spirits departed peacefully, their long imprisonment finally ended. The paranormal activity ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere that had dominated the property lifted like a fog, dissipating in morning sunlight. Marcus completed the restoration of the Harper Estate, but not as Eleanor had intended. Instead of a monument to the family's evil legacy, the mansion became a memorial to their victims. He established a foundation dedicated to investigating cold cases and helping families find closure for missing loved ones. The mansion itself was converted into a research center and museum, ensuring that the Harper family's crimes would be remembered and never repeated. The inheritance that had seemed like a blessing had revealed itself to be a test, one that Marcus had passed by choosing justice over personal gain. The Harper Estate still stands on its hill overlooking Millbrook, but its dark secrets have been exposed to the light. The victims who had been hidden within its walls for decades finally received the recognition and respect they had been denied in death, and their families found the closure that had eluded them for generations. Marcus Thompson had inherited more than money and property. He had inherited a responsibility to ensure that evil could not hide behind wealth and privilege. The restoration of the Harper Estate became a restoration of justice, proving that some secrets are too important to remain buried, no matter the cost of revealing them. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious.